Picture a moment from your own life when you were straining against something that would not yield. Maybe a decision someone else already made, a door that closed on you, or even a mistake you wish you could rewind that refuses to become less true just because you regret it. In those moments, we often do what a drowning person does. We thrash around and spend precious energy fighting the very water that could actually hold us up. And then afterwards, we are so exhausted, not because the problem was solved, but because we tried to resolve what was never truly ours to solve. My name is Joshua T. Whaley, and in today's reflection, I want to offer a simple practice that is also a lifelong discipline. Letting go of what you cannot change, and instead focusing all your energy on what you can. Yes, this sounds like common sense until you try to live it on a Wednesday afternoon when you are already tired from the week and someone misunderstands you, even though in your head you were perfectly clear. Standing on a hillside some 2,000 years ago, a man named Yeshua spoke to a large group of people who knew uncertainty as a daily companion. He told them not to worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. He pointed to birds that do not stockpile and lilies that do not strain, and he asked a question that still cuts through our modern anxiety. Which of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? However, he was not praising irresponsibility, denying hardship, drawing a boundary around the mind's futile labor, or even naming worry as an attempt to control what we cannot control. Instead, he was inviting us back to the only place where action is possible, the here and now. In Taoist thought, the Tao is the way things are when we stop trying to bully the river, because water may yield, but it still wears down stone. And in Buddhist teaching, there is the insight that clinging is a primary engine of suffering, such as clinging to outcomes, to identity, or how we think life should unfold. The mind grabs, and that is what hurts. Yet, freedom begins when we see this grabbing clearly and loosen our grip. What is striking is that these two streams, Yeshua and the sages of the East, meet at a shared crossroads. Acceptance. Accept what is and act where you can. Because if you accept without acting, you drift into resignation. And if you act without accepting, you burn in frustration. The mature path is to hold both, which leads you to face reality without flinching, and then you bring your motivation to the portion of reality that actually responds to will. Energy is not just a poetic word, it is your finite attention. When you pour that energy into what cannot be changed, you do not merely fail. You are training yourself into helplessness. You rehearse the belief that you have no agency because you keep aiming your attention at the wrong target. When you pour your energy into what can be changed, you may still face difficulty, but you regain your dignity, and with this, you are no longer a hostage to the world's randomness. Imagine a person who keeps replaying an argument from last year. Every night, the scene returns with better comebacks, sharper logic, and the perfect final sentence. But the argument is over. The past is not a courtroom where you can re-enter and win. The Stoics would say you are consenting to an impression that says this must be different than it is. Buddhist teachers would say you are feeding the flame of craving for a different history, a different story. Yeshua might ask you to consider forgiveness, not as a sentimental feeling, but as release, letting the debt go so your own heart is no longer chained to it. The shared invitation is to step out of the replay and into the next faithful action you can take today. Forgiveness is one of the clearest examples of focusing on what you can change. You cannot change what happened, force the other person to understand the wrong, or even make them repent, but you can decide what you will carry. Yeshua speaks of forgiving not 7 times, but 70 times 7, which is a way of saying you practice it until it becomes the air you breathe, or until the 491st time they wrong you. Joking aside, this is not a denial of justice. It is a refusal to let poison remain in your bloodstream. A Stoic would translate the same idea by saying you do not surrender your inner life to someone else's actions. An Eastern teacher might call it non-attachment to the story, different vocabularies, same liberation of the self. Now, let's be honest about a harder category, because some things we cannot change are not merely inconvenient. They are devastating, such as loss, illness, betrayal, or the ending of a relationship you hoped would last. In these cases, letting go can sound like a command to stop feeling. That is not what any of these traditions ultimately teach. The Stoics were sometimes caricatured as emotionless, but their deeper aim was clarity, to feel what is human without being ruled by what is impulsive. Buddhist practice does not erase grief. It allows the emotion to move through without becoming a permanent identity. And Yeshua does not float above sorrow. He instead weeps at the tomb of his friend. Letting go is not the absence of tears. It is the end of the argument with reality. Acceptance is often misunderstood as approval, which is wrong. You can accept that something happened without approving of it. You can accept that you are aging without celebrating every ache. Or you can accept that someone is behaving poorly without excusing it. Acceptance simply means you stop insisting that reality be something other than what it currently is. Only then can you choose an honest response. When we do not accept, we are like a physician trying to treat an illness while refusing to look at the patient's chart. Reality is that chart. Much of what we struggle to let go of is actually the ego's demand to be in charge. The ego wants to control outcomes so it can feel safe. It wants to control other people so it can feel validated. And it wants to control the narrative so it can feel righteous. Yet control is a narrow tool. It works for machines, schedules, and certain kinds of planning, but it does not work for hearts, mortality, or the mystery of timing. When we overuse our control, we damage what we are trying to hold on to. Yeshua pointed us inward when most are only obsessed with outward appearances. He speaks about cleaning the inside, about treasure and the heart, about what comes out of a person as a sign of what is within, because you cannot control every perception of you, like the rumor mill or other people's misunderstanding of you, but you can control the integrity of your life, such as whether your words match your values or whether your private self and public self are aligned. This is not a small thing. It is the foundation of inner peace. Eastern philosophy adds another dimension to this, compassion without clinging. In some Buddhist traditions, there is the image of the Bodhisattva, one who commits to the relief of suffering while understanding that outcomes are never fully controllable. You act wholeheartedly, and you release the demand that the world reward your effort on your timeline. This is deeply practical because it means you can serve without burning out. After all, burnout often comes not from effort, but from attachment. The secret contract we make with life that says, if I do my part, if I don't let go, you must deliver a certain result. But why is letting go so hard? Because it can feel like losing. The mind says, if I stop gripping, everything will fall apart. But much of what falls apart when you stop clutching was never sustainable anyway. Letting go is not throwing your life away. It is making room for reality and then finding a better kind of strength. It is stepping out of the exhausting job of being the manager of the universe because you are only the assistant manager, and instead returning to the more sacred job of being a faithful human being. With this, discernment becomes the key. How do you tell what can be changed? Ask yourself a few simple questions. Is this within my direct choice right now? If I took a firm step today, Would it influence this situation? Is my effort producing movement or only agitation? Am I trying to control an outcome, or am I tending to my character and my next action? Am I confusing responsibility with omnipotence? The moment you can name what is not yours, you feel a quiet return of power, because your power is no longer leaking into the impossible. There is a kind of courage that looks like softness. It is the courage to stop arguing with the facts and just sit with the discomfort without turning it into drama. The Taoist image of water is helpful here. Water does not insist that the rock apologize for being a rock. It flows, it adapts, and it keeps moving. That is not weakness. It is intelligence. This is all fine, but what about anger, you may ask? Sometimes we resist letting go because we fear it will make us tolerate injustice. However, anger can be separated into two parts. There is information in it, like a signal that something matters, and there is the heat of rumination, the replay, the fantasies of revenge, and the tightening that harms you more than the situation ever could. Letting go does not mean abandoning the signal. Instead, it means refusing the corrosive flames of rage. You can keep the clarity and release the poison. You can work for change where change is possible and accept the limits of what one person can do without surrendering to despair. As I sit at my desk and write this reflection, I am looking at my statue of a meditating Yeshua next to my computer, and I am reminded of his teachings on non-retaliation that some have misunderstood as weakness when they are actually disciplined strength. To refuse to mirror hatred is to refuse to let another person write your story. Turning the other cheek is not the same as inviting abuse. It can mean stepping out of the reflex that says, I must answer violence with violence, insult with insult, contempt with contempt. It is another way of locating your agency. You may not be able to control what someone does to you, but you can choose what you become in response. This kind of life of inner peace is built in the smallest of moments. When you are stuck in traffic, you can practice releasing what you cannot change and choosing what you can. You cannot unmake the cars, but you can relax your shoulders, choose patience, and put on your favorite song, which, for me, if you can believe it, is the live version of Jane Said by Jane's Addiction. When you receive criticism, you cannot control whether it was delivered kindly, but you can control whether you listen to what is useful and laugh off the rest. The traditions we are drawing from all point toward an inner freedom that cannot be outsourced. The Stoics spoke of an inner citadel, a place in you that remains yours if you guard it wisely. Yeshua taught of a kingdom that is not merely out there but within and among you, something that begins in the heart and radiates outward. Eastern teachers speak of awakening, of seeing clearly what is real and what is illusion. You do not have to agree on metaphysics to recognize the shared practice. Train the inner life so the outer life does not constantly kidnap it. There is also a communal dimension. Sometimes what we cannot change alone can be influenced together. You may not be able to fix a broken system by yourself, but you can join others. Personally, I attend a Bible study every other week where the group leader and my friend always sarcastically asks me, what does the Buddha say? Or what does a Buddhist think? Kidding aside, you can organize, volunteer, mentor, donate, create, speak truth, and even protect the vulnerable in your immediate sphere. Letting go of what you cannot change is not a retreat from the world. It is choosing effective engagement instead of performative frustration. It is asking where your contribution actually meets the problem. In closing this reflection, Yeshua once told us that each day has enough trouble of its own, which means each day also has enough grace for its own work as well. The Stoics remind us that our life is made not by what happens, but by how we meet what happens. Eastern wisdom reminds us that the grip is optional and that peace appears when we stop clutching at the river. Hold these together, and you have a path you can walk in any circumstance. Let go of what you cannot change and invest yourself in what you can. And watch how your energy, once scattered into the impossible, becomes a steady light in the ongoing story of your greater possibility. If you enjoyed this reflection, please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you would truly like to support me or wish to learn more about humanity's hidden history and Yeshua's secret teachings, you can purchase your copies of Forbidden Genesis, The Untold Story of Man in Forbidden Genesis Part 2, The Secret Books of Yeshua, today. The links are in the description box below. Thank you so much for your time.